All right. Again, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Ivy Ibuen, and I'm the Director of Operations and External Relations here at the Division of Graduate Education. And I just want to go ahead and let the Grad Slam team introduce themselves really quickly. Let's start with Courtney.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Oh, froze for a second. Hi, everybody. My name is Courtney. I am one of the events and engagement specialists for the Division of Graduate Education. I work alongside Lewis just to make all of our events happening. Happy to be on the Grad Slam team again this year. And I'll pass it over to Lewis.
Woo! Hi, everybody. I'm Lewis. I use they, them pronouns, and I am also an events and engagement specialist. I work alongside Courtney to plan many of our events that we put on through the Division of Graduate Education, including Grad Slam. And so I'll be part of the Grad Slam team as well. You'll probably get emails from me or something like that. But good to meet you all, and pass it on to Vanya.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces here today. Thanks for being here and coming back. We love to see you come back. And for those who are new with us today, welcome. We love new faces too. I am the communications and marketing lead for the Division of Graduate Education, and I work with Ivy, Courtney, Lewis to speak to the campus, really. So welcome. Nice to have you here today.
Now, before I hand it off to Lola, I wanted to go over some important dates, deadlines, and information that you need to know. So some of you have probably heard this a few times by now. So otherwise, the most important deadline that is coming up this Friday is the registration deadline for the competition. So if you haven't already done so, please register for the competition. You have nothing to lose by doing that. Very low stakes. So, and Vanya just dropped the registration link in the chat. So again, the deadline is this Friday. And to be eligible for Grad Slam, you need to be currently registered and enrolled in winter quarter and be in good academic standing. So that's one of the more important ones to remember. And then the next deadline to note would be Monday, February 12th, and that is the preliminary video submission round deadline. So in order to qualify and be eligible for that round, you need to attend the small group coaching sessions, which will be happening next week. And in order to get those links to register for the small group coaching sessions, you need to be registered for the competition. So first register, and then you will get an email with the small group coaching links. Attend one of those small group coaching sessions, and then submit your video on February 12th. Now, from that preliminary video submission round, we will select the top 20 presenters to compete in an in-person semifinal rounds. So definitely in person. There is no video round for semifinals. It's strictly in person. And the two rounds will happen on Tuesday, March 5th, 2024 at Kirchhoff Grand Salon here on campus. So we have a morning round and an afternoon round. And then if you're thinking optimistically, the final competition will happen on Tuesday, April 2nd at Luskin Conference Center here on campus. And so we will select 10 finalists to compete in that final competition. And then from the final competition, the UCLA champion will go on to compete in the UC-wide competition, which will happen in May. Usually it's the first Friday in May, and that will happen in San Francisco. So they haven't announced the official date yet, but very likely that it will be the first Friday in May. And so last year, just if you didn't know already, the UCLA champion was also the UC champion last year. So that's Brandon Say. So we were very excited and very proud that Brandon won the competition last year. Also for our 10 finalists this year, you will also be, if you're thinking optimistically, you will also be invited to a lunch with Dean Susan Etner that will happen the following day. So Wednesday, April 3rd. So that will be a lunch with Dean Etner and some other distinguished guests. So something to note on your calendar as well. And then other things to note, that our website, if someone on the team can drop the website in the chat, the website has the presentation guidelines and other important information that you need to know. Basically, the gist of Grad Slam is you give a 3-minute presentation and you can have one slide with your 3-minute presentation. Okay, so the 3 minutes start the very first second you open your mouth and utter your first word. And then tomorrow we have one last workshop for this week, and that one is the Finesse Your Slide workshop. So if you want some tips on how you can make the most out of your one slide, we highly recommend that you attend that workshop tomorrow. And then in the small group coaching sessions that are happening next week, we will have our Grad Slam alums helping to facilitate those sessions to give you some feedback and tips on your presentations. So again, highly recommend that you come to the workshop tomorrow if you'd like some guidance on how to put your slide together. Also, if you have any question about the competition itself, or any of the workshops that have happened this week or last week, we had 2 last week, you can feel free to drop us a line at the email I just dropped in the chat, askgrad@grad.ucla.edu, and put Grad Slam in the title, in the subject line, and we will try and get back to you as soon as possible. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Lola.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. First, I want to give a great thanks to the Grand Slam team for inviting me to speak and present today. Before I jump into my presentation, I do want to share a little bit of information about me. So my name is Lola Engel. I am a UCLA alum. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology in 2012. I also have my master's degree from Pepperdine University in organizational leadership and learning, which is essentially a fancy way of saying that I got my master's degree in learning how organizations learn, how they help employees improve and level up and upskill, as well as how they manage different dynamics, relationships that happen in organizations and businesses. So for my role here at UCLA, I do a couple of things. One of them is I manage the staff enrichment program. It's a 10-month-long professional development program for staff, but I also give workshops to UCLA staff members and sometimes students as well about how you can upskill. Now, today's presentation is a marriage between 2 presentations I typically give to staff, each of which is 2 to 3 hours long. So I am going to be giving you the abridged version. But what I love to share about this presentation is it is a very meta presentation, because I am giving you a presentation on how to give great presentations. So I hope that through this experience of today's workshop, not only are you going to learn from the things that I'm sharing, but you're also going to get some sort of inspiration from the way that I present, whether that is the way that I talk, the way that I present my slides, how I use animations. All of it is essentially a learning tool and a learning experience. I'm going to be dissecting a compelling presentation into 4 steps for you all today. And the first step is scripting your presentation. Now, we use the term script often for things like a screenplay or a movie, but we do the same type of thing when we are developing our presentations or workshops or speeches, anything like that. You want to have a good understanding of the content that you're going to be discussing before you actually present on that content. There's many reasons why you're going to take the time to develop a great script for any presentation that you give. But the one that I often like to highlight is having a great foundational script is going to give you the confidence to actually do a little bit of improvisation. The more that you know your content inside and out, the more you're going to be able to respond to anything that might happen, whether that is someone in the audience having a coughing fit, or maybe your button isn't working and it's not moving on to the next animation. If you know your script really well, you know your content well, you're going to feel more confident when things might potentially go wrong. Now, what do we need in order to develop great content and a great script? Well, there are a lot of things that make up a wonderful presentation, and I'm limited in time, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But I have found 3 things that really sum up what a great presentation entails. Now, the first thing, and I would say the most important thing, is you want to make sure that the content of your presentation really speaks directly to the audience that is in front of you. I find that starting with the audience in mind is the best way when you're drafting your content, and for many reasons, right? So let's say that you're presenting on your research, and I'll give a hypothetical. Let's say that your research is on mental health amongst the veteran population. Well, if you're presenting in front of a group of UCLA students, the way that you deliver the content for your research on mental health for veterans is going to be very different. You're going to make an assumption that most of the people in the audience are younger. Maybe they're between the ages of 18 and 24. They're all pursuing an academic degree, so they are really primed for learning, right? And with the UCLA population specifically, you can look up some demographical data about them and know, generally speaking, where they might be coming from, what their general understanding is. And you could connect to them as a UCLA student yourself. Well, let's say that you're doing your presentation to politicians. The way that you're going to talk about mental health with veterans is going to be drastically different when you're talking to UCLA students versus talking to politicians. You might incorporate in your presentation something about policy reform, for example, or you might talk about how their constituents are impacted by mental health in the veteran population. Let's add a third category. Let's say instead of UCLA students or politicians, you are talking to other veterans. Well, this speaks directly to them because they themselves are veterans, and a lot of them might be dealing with mental illness themselves. So my main takeaway is you really want to understand who are going to be the people in front of you, because that is going to change the argument that you make to the people that you're presenting to. So I've put together a list of some questions that you can consider and maybe even go through before you start scripting your presentation. Now I've shared my slide deck with Ivy, and I gave her permission to share this with you all today. So do not feel like you have to vigorously write down everything. But I want you all to maybe focus on what I'm saying and take in the content, and then you can review it later. Now, the first question is a broad question, right? Who is in the audience? If you are going to make it to the semifinals and you're going to make it even further than that, it's a good idea to understand the type of people that might be in the room, because that might impact the way that you share the content. Now, you might even go a step further when it comes to understanding your audience by asking yourself, what are the things that my audience have in common? For example, maybe the people that are in the audience all have college degrees, right? Then maybe they have specific foundational knowledge that might make it easier for you to explain certain concepts in your research. Maybe the people in the audience are roughly in a certain age group, or they come from a certain geographical area, right? Maybe the people in the room, what they have in common is all of them live in California because this is a UC program. Well, what do you know about California? People in California are typically liberal. We have a lot of sunshine. We have certain amenities here in California that people in other states don't necessarily have. A lot of the people that live in California are from major or medium-sized cities. That might change the way that you approach the content, knowing that about your audience. Now, this is important specifically for those of you who may have research that is in a topic that not a lot of people know about, right? Especially if your research is centered on the hard sciences. What do people already know about the topic that you're going to discuss? And what do people not know? You may have to take a moment to define some of the things so that your audience can understand and comprehend your content. Now, I also want you to take some time to think about what your audience might care about. Let's say you're doing your research on sustainability, right? Is that something that you perceive your audience is going to have a passion about? Maybe your research is on healthcare and affordability of healthcare. Is that something that you think your audience will care about? And if you have concerns that maybe it's not going to be relatable or relevant to them, how can you make your content relevant to them? And I'll talk about that a little bit more in our next section. Now, we talked about how the audience might have things in common. You do want to take some time to also figure out what they might have that is not in common, right? Are there going to be people in the audience that have conflicting ideologies, conflicting wishes and needs, diverse backgrounds? Then how are you going to approach the content of your presentation so that you're able to meet everyone in your audience where they are? And then lastly, what do you want your audience to take away from the content of your presentation? A great way to maybe figure that out is to say, when I am done with my presentation, I want my audience to blank. What is that blank? I want them to understand the impact of cancer on underserved communities. I want them to vote for policy change that can improve whatever it is that your research is on. What is it that you want them to have as their major takeaway? Now, once you answer a lot of these questions about your audience, then you can really start building the foundation of the content of your presentation to make sure that you're hitting all of those points, that your content is relevant to them, it's something that they care about, and it's something that they're going to be able to understand. Now, we done the homework to understand what our audience's needs might be. What would be another great thing to have as part of your presentation? Well, I would recommend that you get some clarity on the purpose of your presentation. It's very easy for someone to come on a stage and talk about facts or share statistics or even go through some major talking points about your research. But what I find distinguishes a good presentation from a great presentation is intention. When you have an intention, when you have a purpose for your presentation, you are more likely to have engagement with your audience and you're going to be a little bit more memorable. So here's a question that you can ask to kind of get to your purpose for your presentation. And I want you to consider how you would finish this sentence. Is the purpose of your presentation to persuade, to inform, or to inspire? If we think of all of the great speeches or presentations, or even some of the lectures that you might have experienced in your undergrad or graduate level coursework, oftentimes they're doing one of these three things very well. Yes, you can both be persuasive, informative, and inspirational in one presentation, But by picking one of these three that is going to be your concentration, you really are going to be able to build a meatier presentation where the takeaway is clearer, especially when you only have 3 minutes to speak. So what's the distinction between these three different purposes for a presentation? Well, if you are giving a presentation where you want it to be persuasive, essentially you are building your content in a way to convince people to either do something or think a certain way. So maybe your research is in a niche area, some form of research that not a lot of people are paying attention to. Well, maybe you want to persuade them to start paying attention to that. Or maybe you want to persuade your audience to take certain actions in order to further the type of research that you're doing. Now, inform is very intuitive, right? Some of you just want to get the information about your research out there. Well, if inform is your big purpose, then you want to make sure that you are building your presentation in a way that is focused on clarity of your content, clarity on the topic of your research. And then the last one is inspire. Maybe your research is something that has a major impact on our community, on our country, on the world, and you want to galvanize people into action. So how can you formulate your presentation in a way that builds in inspiration and weaves it in and out throughout the workshop? So once you understand your audience and you pick your focus, I think that that's going to give you a good funnel of which you can start coming up with the content of what you're presenting on. Now, the other element of a great presentation that I identify is it contains engaging content. I will speak for myself, but maybe this will resonate with many of you out there. I've been to many a class lecture in my lifetime, both during my undergrad and my graduate degree, where I was dozing off. I was having a really hard time connecting to the material. I found myself thinking about, what am I going to eat for dinner? Oh no, for laundry and I don't have any clean pants for tomorrow. In your brain, that ends up taking over rather than what it is that the person is sharing with you. Now, there are many reasons why your audience might lose engagement. For example, the content of the presentation can be too dense and too informative, or maybe the content is just not relatable enough. Well, what are some ways that we can pepper in engagement throughout our presentations? Now, there are many things that you can do, but I know you're all limited by 3 minutes. You can't, whip out a prop, or you can't have an open discussion. But there are other ways that you can do that without actively engaging with the audience and pulling them forward. Now, the first is to simplify complex information through analogy, especially for those of you who are doing research that, the normal everyday person doesn't really have a lot of background experience in. One way that people can become disengaged with your content is they're just not able to follow what it is that you're sharing with them. So is there some sort of analogy, something that everybody knows about that you can draw a parallel between with your research? So Ivy was gracious in sharing with me some of the videos from past Grad Slam presentations. And the one that I immediately was drawn into was this woman who gave her presentation and started out by talking about a map and going on a journey, going on a road trip. Most of us have been on a road trip. We've gone on a journey before. And then she used that analogy to say that the pathway to cancer diagnosis and also cancer cures is very similar to a journey that you would take on a roadmap. There's pit stops along the way. Sometimes things happen, whether that is a flat tire, etc. But because you're relating to the audience in a term that they understand, they're more likely to listen to what it is that you have to say, because they connect, they resonate with your example. The other thing that you can do in order to engage your audience more is to build a connection with them through some sort of personal anecdote or a story of someone else. Whether that, again, it could be your own personal story, it could be the story of a friend, a patient, a student. It could also be the story of someone famous that a lot of people know, right? Maybe you provide the story of Michael Jordan or Barack Obama or Marie Curie. These personal anecdotes and these stories, it's a wonderful tool to keep people engaged. We naturally connect with storytelling. It's the reason why we're up late at night on our 5th hour binge watching Netflix, right? We love good storytelling. So can you weave into your presentation some sort of storytelling element in order to keep your audience engaged and keep them connected to your content? Now, the last example that I want to share with you of a way that you can engage with your audience more is to create a mental image through a powerful example. Very similar to an analogy, but you're giving an actual tangible example of where this might come up in the real world. So I want to provide an example for all of you of a powerful example that really helps define a term. Now, in my graduate degree program, I decided to focus my capstone project on conflict. Specifically, I wanted to do my capstone project on intergroup conflict and understanding what intergroup conflict is, how it arises within organizations, and what are the solutions that can be implemented in order to minimize intergroup conflict in a business. Now, some of you, maybe you've figured out what intergroup conflict is. Others of you in the room might be scratching your head, what is intergroup conflict and what does that mean? So if I was to give a short presentation on intergroup conflict, I might use an example of something that everyone knows. So let's talk about the US Senate. The US Senate is a group of 100 politicians, and the purpose of the Senate is for them to work together in order to create laws and policies for our country. And the Senate is made up of 2 groups of people, Democrats and Republicans, who are both informed to work together in order to make positive change for the American people. But Democrats and Republicans, they don't always see eye to eye. They have different ideologies, they have different types of constituents, and ultimately that creates a lot of infighting. Even though they all work for the same purpose, the US Senate, they are fighting within their own group. This is intergroup conflict. And this type of conflict can happen not just in the Senate, but other businesses like Barnes & Noble. You can have intergroup conflict between the booksellers and the cafe baristas. Maybe they get paid different salaries, maybe they have different resources, maybe their bosses have different attitudes about how to approach their direct reports, and that creates tension between the 2 groups. So this is an example of how you can take a real world example that a lot of people know and then draw a parallel to something that might be part of your research. So give that some thought. Are there any real world examples that can help you really communicate to your audience the meat and potatoes of what is your research and what it is that you're trying to do? Now, before I wrap up the scripting section, I do want to talk a little bit more about some additional tips that you might want to consider as you start drafting the content of your Grad Slam presentations. And I am an internal optimist, so I love to start with the negatives, get that out of the way, and then end on a positive note. So what are some things we want to avoid when we're drafting our content? The first is I really do recommend that you avoid using acronyms, slang, or any sort of inside baseball, especially since the audience that you're going to be presenting to, they are not necessarily going to be subject matter experts on your topic of research. So try to avoid using acronyms as much as you can. Whenever there's an acronym, can you spell it out? If there is a term that is very commonly used in your field of study, but if you were to say that word to your grandmother, she would scratch her head and say, I don't know what you're talking about, Lola. Can you find a different word to use so that your audience can understand? The reason why we don't want to use inside baseball or acronyms or slang is we never want to alienate our audience. We never want to make them feel lesser than because they don't understand the content of what you're sharing. We want to make sure that everyone in the room feels like they can digest your content and maybe they can even go to someone else and explain your presentation to someone else. The next thing is I want to recommend, whenever possible, using inclusive language. Inclusive language is important because, again, we don't want to alienate our audience. We want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with our content, that they feel like it's a safe space. The more comfortable the audience feels with you in the room, the more likely they are to engage in your content. And the last thing that I want to make sure that all of you avoid doing is hard to pronounce words. I know for me, I've always had that urge, right? I want to sound smart. I want to look really well in front of academics or my peers. So maybe I'll try to use a really big word to sound fancy. But again, ultimately, it's another tool for alienating your audience. And especially if you're using a word that's really hard for you to pronounce, it can trip you up. So is there a synonym for a hard to pronounce word that you can use instead? Believe you me, people are not going to walk away from your presentation and think, oh my gosh, Lola just used that massive word, she must be smart. They might leave saying, oh my gosh, Lola used this word and I have no idea what it means. I feel inadequate. And we don't want our audience to feel inadequate at all. So what are some things that we can do instead when we're scripting our presentation? Again, we want to pepper analogies, metaphors, similes, examples wherever we can and wherever it makes sense. Again, it is one of the easiest ways to have someone understand complex information. If you can relate it to something that they already understand, it's going to be a much easier way for them to connect the dots. The next thing is it's okay to repeat important elements in your script. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to say the same sentence a second time, especially if it's important. The same goes for using any sort of vocal differentiation to emphasize a word or stress important words. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the rehearsal part. So hopefully you've all written your script and you're ready to start crafting your visuals. I understand you'll have another presentation on upgrading, finessing your visuals, but there are a couple of talking points that I wanted to share with you as well. This might seem like a really dramatic example. I'm going to be honest though, I have been to presentations before where I've seen a slide that was not too far off from this at all. Now, this is an example of a bad slide for several reasons. The first thing is there's no contrast. So contrast means dark colors and very light colors, and you want the difference between the hues to be as strong as possible. That makes it easier on the eyes to see. So you want to make sure you're being mindful of the colors that you're using, especially the background of your presentation with the words or whatever images might be there. You want to use a very strong contrast for that. Be very careful though about contrast. Don't just assume the contrast is good from your own computer. You don't know what the contrast is going to look like when it's being projected on a projector behind you. So can you look at your presentation from other people's computers, or can you make sure that the contrasting color is bold enough that no matter what color or what computer or projector is used, that they're going to be able to see clearly everything that is being on your presentation. The other thing I want to highlight of why this is a bad presentation slide is it is very full of text. I know. That's what we assume we have to do when we are giving a presentation, but I'll give you a real world example. Have any of you been in a lecture in college or in your grad program where your professor has a slide and it has a full paragraph on it and you're conflicted? You don't know, do I read the slide? Do I write down what's on the slide deck? Do I listen? And ultimately you end up doing neither. You're just listening and writing and reading poorly. All of them are really at like 20% instead of doing one or the other at 100%. That is what happens when you have too much text on your slide deck. You're putting your audience in an uncomfortable position where they don't know, am I supposed to read or am I supposed to listen? A PowerPoint presentation is a visual medium. It is designed to be a visual aid to what you're saying. The things that are coming out of your mouth is number one, and your slide deck is just there to support you. And I think a good example of why your slide deck is just an aid is to think of TED Talks, for example. When you watch a TED Talk, sometimes they have slides up, but for the most part, the meat of what they're saying is from their words. That's why you can take the TED Talk and you can put it in a podcast. And yes, you're not seeing their visual aids. It would be cool to have that there, but you're still getting the important part. So remember that if you ever feel the urge to put a lot of words onto your slide. Ultimately, slides are supposed to be cues, and they're not supposed to be there to have you read. Because if you were reading your slides, then it could have been an email. So when we're designing our slides, what we really want to do is we want to find a good balance between function and form. Function is essentially that it works, right? It's serving the purpose of the slide, right? Whether that is to enhance the words that are coming out of your mouth, or elevate your speech. And then form is just the structure of what it is. We want to have a good balance between the two. So things to consider when we are developing our visual aids and we want to find a balance between function and form. Well, the first thing is we want to make sure that the content on your slides is legible. There are lots of really cool, fun, fancy fonts out there, but if people can't read it, then there isn't a reason to be there, right? So we want to make sure that the size is good enough for people to see and that the font is something that most people can understand. So we want to avoid the cursive script type fonts, for example, or ones that might be more difficult and challenging for people to read if they have dyslexia, for example, or some sort of other visual impairment. We want to be considerate of that. So a safe font is always to stay in the serif family, for example. Now we want our slides to also be simple. I know that there's going to be an urge for many of you to put a bunch of images and words and animation on your one single slide deck because you know you only have one slide. But again, remember that your slides are there to just be a small visual aid to what is coming out of your mouth. So we want to limit the words on our slide. And I make this comment about more slides. This is more for when you're not limited to one slide. In general, slides are free. So as you all continue through your academic career and your professional lives and you do give more presentations, remember that you can have as many slides as you want in the real world. For this, you can't, but remember that in the real world, you can always just add more slides instead of jam packing content or pictures onto one. And then again, we want to be mindful of the contrast. Now, when it comes to form, we want to be mindful of color and layout. We want to try to stay away from colors that are overly loud and bright. Those colors can be too exciting. They can be distracting, and we want people to focus on your face and the words that you're saying. We don't want them to be overwhelmed by a neon green background with hot pink lettering. We also want to be mindful of the layout, right? We want to make sure that things are not on top of each other, that there are clear distinctions between maybe one segment and another. So hopefully, after you've written your script, you come up with your visual aid of your one slide, we are going to transition into rehearsing. Now, there are the 5 P's of public speaking that I love to talk about with people. The first is your pitch. You should take some time to listen to yourself, understand your pitch, right? Do you have a high-pitched voice? Do you have a low-pitched voice? Is that something that you want to be mindful of and control when you're speaking in public? The next is the pace of your speech. I will say this right now, and it'll sound made up, but when we are nervous, we talk faster. And you're going to practice, you're going to time yourself, you're going to say, oh, I am right at 2 minutes and 50 seconds. And then you're going to get on stage and you will be shocked to find out that you did it in 2 minutes and 20 seconds, that you somehow shaved off 30 seconds. This is natural. So what I want all of you to do is, before you go on stage, take a deep breath, remind yourself of your pace. Take your time. People are there to hear what you have to say. And even when you're mindful of your pace, you might still speed up a little bit, but at least bring some awareness that your pace might speed up a little bit. So maybe even practice slower than you would in a normal speaking voice, just to get comfortable with a slower pace. Power is something that does not come natural to people. Power is the volume of your voice. If you make it to semifinals and you're performing your presentation in front of a live audience, most likely you're going to have a microphone, but you still want to work on speaking a little bit more loudly and clearly. That is going to help build your confidence a little bit. Now, something I want to talk about that many of you might be scared of, because that 3 minutes sounds short, but if you've ever tried to brush your teeth for 3 minutes, you'll realize that 3 minutes is actually a long time. Some of you might be hesitant to include pauses, pregnant pauses in your presentation. But pregnant pauses can be a very effective tool to have people lean in a little bit more. And it's not uncomfortable. I just did a pregnant pause there. Maybe you say something, maybe there's some statistic or fact for your research that is just so powerful that you want people to sit with it for a little bit. So determine if there's any points in your presentation that you want people to take a 1 second pause to let it digest. That pausing, that time for digestion, can be very powerful. And then next is, I want you all to consider your persona when you're on stage. Are you more even-tempered and controlled? Are you energetic? Are you walking around the room? Are you making jokes? What is the persona that you want? How do you want to present yourself when you're on stage? All of these are things that you can play with during the rehearsal period. I don't want you to pick your pitch, your pace, your power, your pausing, and your persona in one go and say, done. Play around with it. Maybe you practice one time being a little bit more controlled and a stereotypical professional posture. And then the next time you rehearse it, you do it a little bit more loose and you're walking around a little bit more, you're adding more humor to it. Maybe you try out a pause here, you don't like it, you try out a pause somewhere else. Maybe you play around with the pace. You have some areas where you're doing it at a normal pace, and then some sentences that you slow it down so they can digest. Rehearsal is all about play, trying things out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, making adjustments until you find something that feels comfortable for you. And when you're in the rehearsal phase, there are some other things that I want you to be mindful of. So first, yes, I want you to test out those P's until you find something that's comfortable. But the other thing I want you to do is to practice in similar conditions to the live event. There's many reasons for this, and I'll give you some examples. Let's say you're rehearsing and you put time to rehearse in the morning, but then when you're presenting, it's going to be the afternoon. Maybe you're a morning person. I'm a morning person, so your energy is really high in the morning. You just had breakfast, you feel more relaxed. And maybe you're one of those people like me who you get that lunchtime slump where your energy starts to dwindle, you get hangry. Well, when you go to present in the afternoon, you're going to feel that, and it's going to feel different than all the times you rehearsed in the morning. Or maybe it's the other way around. Trying to rehearse at the same time of the event is going to help you understand where you are physiologically, and it's going to help you feel comfortable when you are in the real setting. Same thing applies for clothing. There's a reason why in theater they have dress rehearsals. Maybe you go to present in your nice button-up shirt and your blazer, and then you realize, oh man, this shirt is itchy. This thing has this frill on it that I can't quite stop playing with. Or maybe your pants are too tight, your shoes are hurting you. If you don't practice in the outfit that you're going to wear in the long event, you're going to find that those little things are going to be distracting. It's going to take away from your comfort, and it's going to increase your anxiety. So can you practice in the clothing that you're going to wear? Are you going to be standing, or are you going to be sitting, right? Make sure you practice whichever way you're going to do it. Are you going to be holding a microphone? Can you take a prop and practice holding it so that you feel comfortable giving your speech holding something in your hand? Do you know where your slides are going to be? Is it going to be to the side? Is it going to be behind you, right? As much information as you can get about the event and the setup, the time, the more you can recreate the environment and build that comfort into it. Then you're going to time yourself. This is important, but do not time yourself to exactly 3 minutes. You want to build cushion time. If you have a joke, people are going to laugh. Or maybe someone's going to cough in the audience. Or maybe you click your clicker from your intro slide to your next slide and it doesn't work, or you click the thing and the animation has a delay, right? So make sure when you're timing yourself, you also build some cushion time, like 10 seconds, 20 seconds of flexibility, so that if something does happen, you know you have that extra breathing room. And then record yourself. I know that you have to record yourself for the first stage, but let's say you do the first stage and you move on, record yourself in a similar setting to the real thing, right? Put your outfit on, hold your fake mic, record yourself and watch, right? Oh, I don't like how I paused here. I wish that I moved around a little bit more. And as you go through rehearsals, the last step is just iterative, right? You rehearse, you make adjustments, you rehearse again, you go over and over and over until you feel like you're ready for showtime. Now, before I end this, I just want to give a few notes about stage fright for those of you who have anxiety when it comes to public speaking. The first is I really recommend that you shift any bad self-talk to positive self-hype. The people in the room are there because they want to hear about your research. They're there to support you. There's no one in the audience that is trying to do an aha moment, you messed up, right? Everyone is there to support you. So remind yourself that you are part of this graduate degree program for a reason. UCLA picked you for a reason. You're doing this research for a reason. You are one of the top people in these fields. You made it to one of the top universities. So give yourself some of that positive reinforcement before you go on stage. And remind yourself of your strengths, right? I am very knowledgeable about this topic. I am hardworking. I am funny. I have a great smile. Whatever it is that you really like about yourself, can you make that a list and read it off before you go on stage to make yourself feel good, boost your confidence? And then before you get on stage, this depends on the type of person you are. Do you like physical movement to get anxiety out? Well, then can you shake around? Can you walk it out? Or do you like quietness, right? Can you do a breathing exercise before you go on stage? And then adjust your focus away from self and onto the content. Everyone wants to hear about your great research. They're not there to judge you. You're a subject matter expert on your topic, and that is what is the most important. And what I will say, you're going to still be nervous even if you do some of these things, but I think that's a good thing, because being anxious, being nervous, it just means you care. And we're very lucky to be people on the planet who have things that we care deeply about. Your research is something that's important. It's something you've devoted a lot of time to, and that's pretty incredible that you get to live your life working on something that you're passionate about and doing research that is really going to have an impact on our community, on our society, whatever it might be. So I will leave you all with those things to think about. And I'll stop sharing to see if anyone has any questions. I will take silence as I did a great job. Oh, okay. Liza?
You did do a great job. I just have a question. Maybe this is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I was thinking about it as you were presenting. When we're recording, are we recording with the slide as the main image and us as like the speaker image on in the corner or at the top? Or are we recording ourselves as the main image and the slide as a background, like as a, right? So I'm not sure when I do the recording if I should be doing a screen share or how to structure that.
Yes, that's correct. So you'll be in the little speaker box in the corner, and then your slide will be like a screen share. So we will be sharing materials in the next, like once everyone has gone through small group coaching sessions, we will share materials on tips on how to record on Zoom, including how to enlarge your speaker box and make sure it stays large while you're recording. The key to that is recording locally. So, because if you record to the cloud, even if you enlarge your speaker box, it shrinks back to a small size. So if you want to make sure that your face is, quite visible in the recording, then you want to keep that box enlarged. But yes, you would share your slide and then keep yourself in the speaker box.
Okay, thank you.
Question.
I had a couple of questions, one for Lola. Thank you so much for the presentation. The layout, that slide that you had, form, color, layout.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I missed it or there was like could you tell me more about the layout?
Of course. So when I do the longer form of this, I give some examples. When you're looking at PowerPoint, they have a lot of templates that you can use. And some of the templates for a slide deck might be very overwhelming, right? You have a section here, a section here, a section here, a section here. And ultimately that layout can be really hard for people to process. Where do I look? Do I look over here? Do I look over there? What order am I supposed to be paying attention? So there are different ways that you can make sure that people are following where you want them to look. So if you noticed in my presentation, I would put things up one at a time, right? So for example, when I was going through the audience slide and I had all of the questions that you can contemplate when understanding your audience, I could have just put the full list up there. But instead, I brought it question by question so that you're following along with where I'm talking, you know where to look. That's a layout thing. So you just want to be mindful if you have, let's say you have a picture on one side, and then you have one section of text, and then you have another section of text, and you have another section of text. You just always want to ask yourself, is this layout of this slide too overwhelming? Do people intuitively know where they should be looking? And if they don't, how can I make sure that people are paying attention to the part of the slide that I want them to, or that they're not getting so distracted by this complex layout that they're no longer listening to what I'm saying?
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I like that you said, don't make it about the slide, make it about the talk. That's very helpful to me because I tend to put a lot of things on the slide. So maybe just 2, 3 visuals, like one for each minute, and then just don't put it all at once. You can click and animate it where it comes later, and that's it.
Yes, it should be, again, PowerPoints are visual tools. So another example is, when I was giving you the example of the Senate, I could have easily made that as bullet points. But instead, I used the symbol for Democrats and Republicans, and then I used a little stick figure drawing of them fighting, right? That is just a visual representation of what I'm saying instead of putting a bunch of bullet points and words on the slide to describe what I'm saying.
If no one has a question, I want to follow up with something too. Does anyone else has a question? No. So for inclusivity, I was thinking really hard about this, especially Vanya said something yesterday. Thank you, Vanya. You made me think. So my talk is about print culture, like books and written, but I don't want to alienate oral tradition. But there's not time in 3 minutes for me to, address that in my regular, colloquium. I do that, but how do, I don't know, is there a tip that you could give about that?
Well,
And also I want to connect that. Do we have time? I mean, I have to record. Do we have time to define? So, I mean, do people define what is like print culture? What is that? Or should I define the first like 10 seconds?
If you think your audience will benefit from the definition of that, then yes, certainly make time for it in the presentation. If you think it will help them better understand what you're trying to get across, then I don't think it can hurt to do that. You just want to make sure you can fit everything else that you want to say with the rest of the time that you have, if that makes sense.
and what I will say, I have a piggyback on that. You say print culture. I can probably infer what you mean by that, but I'm not 100% certain. So you don't want to make your audience ever think, I think I know what that is. So if you have a sentence that really summarizes what it is in layman's terms, that's always a good idea to make sure that the audience is on the same page. In terms of inclusivity, because you mentioned oral traditions versus, print books and content that way. When I talk about inclusivity, I mean, as it relates to just the demographical differences or the cultural differences of the people in the room, right? And I think that there are some things that we do automatically, right? Like, thanks for coming, ladies and gentlemen, right? When we can say, thank you everyone for coming, we can say something that really embodies everyone in the room. So that's what I meant more with inclusive language. There are going to be topics in your research that is very niche and specific, right? That's why you get your master's degree and you later get your PhD, maybe, is because you want to study something in such minute detail. So you're not going to be able to touch upon all of the other topics that are tangentially related to what it is that you're saying. It's more about inclusive language to the people specifically, and not necessarily making sure that you're talking about other topics in the field of media, for example.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, I think we are at time. I just wanted to say thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And I appreciate the Grand Slam team for also having me. I am rooting for all of you, and hopefully UCLA will take it all again this year.
Thank you, Lola, so much for your time today and facilitating this workshop for us. Really appreciate you. And thank you, everyone who attended. Have a good rest of your Wednesday.